Welcome to Spread Love and Organization, the healthcare leadership podcast where we explore leadership with purpose. I'm Naji, your host, joined today for the second time by Amer Kaissi, an award-winning professor of leadership. Amer is an executive coach that has worked with hundreds of leaders and teams all over the world. He is the author of 5 books, including Ambitious, The Power of Low Ego, High Drive Leadership. His newest book is The Positive Intent Mindset, Exceptional Leadership Through Trust and Accountability. He has been featured on the Harvard Business Review podcast and numerous other media outlets, including our show. He has spoken on leadership topics at more than 300 organizations and professional conferences. Amer lives in San Antonio with his wife and has 2 grown-up kids in college now. Amer, it's so good to have you again with me on this show.
Thank you, Naji. It's a pleasure to be with you. You know, the first time was so much fun, so I'm really looking forward to this time as well.
Before we dig into your new book, like even the title, I have so many questions for you. But for those who may not have heard our first episode, which I really recommend they do, can you give us a little bit a quick refresh on how did your upbringing shape your views on leadership, ego, drive, and now this idea of positive intent?
Yeah. Thank you for that. And you know, the main message from that book, Ambitious, which we talked about last time, was that in leadership, humility is not a weakness. It's actually a strength, and it's a superpower when combined with ambition. So the message was that when leaders are leading through complex and difficult times, which, as we know, healthcare and many other industries right now, these are difficult and complex times, the best leaders are those that connect with humility and elevate with ambition. And I learned this lesson actually from observing my own mother. So I grew up like you did in Lebanon, and my mother also grew up and was born and raised in Lebanon. And you know, she was the president of an orphanage when I was growing up. That's where she spent the majority of her career, is working in not-for-profit, serving kids who didn't have anyone to take care of them. And I would go with her to work, and I observe how she led people, and you know, I would see how she treated them, how she respected people. She loved her team, and they respected her. They loved her too. And sometimes they were a little bit afraid of her because she was tough. Like, she would hold people accountable. The whole place ran like clockwork when she was the leader. So naturally, at the time, I was a child. I didn't know anything about leadership. But when I was writing Ambitious, I talked to her about that. And she explained about that leadership style. And she said, you know, when she became the president of that organization, of the orphanage, that was at the peak of the civil war in Lebanon. And as you recall, these were hard times. And she said, you know, imagine trying to run an orphanage during a civil war, because on the one hand, they didn't have staff. Staff were quitting every day on her. They were calling her and saying, we can't come to work anymore because the roads are too dangerous. On the other hand, they had so many kids to take care of because, unfortunately, a lot of people were dying. So high demand and low supply, but she had to manage and lead during that time. And she said the best way to lead during those difficult times was to connect with people on a human level, to show them that she cared about them with humility, and to still hold them accountable and elevate with ambition and tell them, despite what we're going through, we can still be the best at what we're doing. So that was a leadership lesson I learned back then. And I believe that any leader leading right now through difficult times, you know, the ambitious approach is one of those approaches that are evidence-based and can help, you know, leaders be able to differentiate themselves and lead for high performance for themselves, their teams, and their organizations.
So, Amer, I love it. And I feel like we're going through the new book and how you're thinking about it. And when you said, you know, humility, connect with them at a people level, as she taught you, and again, like impressive work she's done in the country, but also hold people accountable. You know, like, and you know me now well, like I always talk about love and discipline, right? And it feels like very similar to where you're going with your book, but also the research you've been doing and all that you've been researching in leadership. So I'd love to know how you moved from this ambitious concept and how your thinking evolved to now feeling it's the right time to talk about the positive intent mindset. And what does that mean for you?
Yeah. The positive intent mindset is another one of these thoughts that came to me while I was growing up in Lebanon in that civil war. And at the time, it wasn't a well-developed idea, but as you may recall, growing up in a country that was torn like that just showed us that when people assume negative intent towards each other because of political differences, because of religious differences, I mean, the entire society will collapse. People will start mistrusting other groups of people and start looking for reasons to believe that mistrust. Sure enough, the other party is going to act in a way that makes you mistrust them even more. And then mistrust begets more mistrust, negativity begets more negativity, and whole societies collapse. So I see assuming positive intent as one of the practices that ambitious leaders put in place to avoid that cycle of mistrust. As you know, these days, all over the world, but especially here in the West, in the United States, there is a lot of negativity out there. The country is divided as well, as we both know. And employees can't help but bring that negativity with them to the workplace. And that's why we're seeing low engagement, we're seeing low trust, we're seeing lack of collaboration. And we're just, honestly, we're seeing people are miserable at work and outside of work. And I believe that one of the main reasons for that is that we assume negative intent towards each other. And that's what the purpose of the new book is, to say, what if we change that default mindset that we have and we start by assuming positive intent, at least provisionally, and then check with the other person and see what their intentions are. So this is the interplay that you're talking about. There's assuming positive intent, but there's also accountability. You talk about love and discipline. I've talked in the past about ambition, humility, and ambition. I believe that is the sweet spot for leaders, is to bring in, the part where you are caring for people, but also the other aspect where you are challenging them at the same time.
So let's dig in this concept, because it's kind of like putting two facing one another, right? Like trust and accountability, right? Like you're putting them head to head, basically, which is key. So I want to dig a little bit more about this, because, well, we both know how many of us like think about trust. We all believe that high performing team trust is probably the most important piece in high performing teams, but yet we don't build trust by saying we want to build trust, right? Like there's a lot of pieces that comes behind it. And it was interesting when I read like trust and accountability. Like I want to hear more about this. Like personally, I always feel like you can only trust someone who has always demonstrated accountability towards what they're doing. The action is way more important than the words. And all. But are you thinking about it that way, or like are you confronting these two to make sure that it's an and not one without the other? Like how help us think about it as leaders?
Definitely, it's a yes and kind of thinking, where we're thinking first we need to start from a starting position of trust. And you're absolutely right. We don't build trust by saying, well, let's have trust. We build trust first by starting to trust, even if the other person hasn't demonstrated yet that they are worthy of that trust. So it's a leap of faith, which is a little bit scary, which is a little bit challenging. But I believe that is the duty of leaders, is to jump and then hope that solid ground will appear. So you start by trusting the other person, assuming that they have positive intent. But it's not a naive approach to live or to work. There needs to be accountability there. Assuming positive intent does not replace conflict resolution. It does not replace having difficult conversations with people where you tell them that their performance is not up to standards, where you point a mistake or a behavior that they've been engaged in that is not productive for the team. So it is, you start with the initial position, which makes for a much better difficult conversation. But then you have the difficult conversation where you're holding the other person accountable. And sure, when we trust first, we're going to get burned sometimes. That is inevitable. We're going to get burned sometimes. I would argue, though, that we over exaggerate how many times we're going to get burned. We think we're going to get burned, 80% of the time, or 1 out of 2 every time we trust. And the research shows that's not the case, because most people are actually decent. Most people are honest. Most people are trying to do a good job. Now, is there 5% of people who will take advantage of that trust and burn us? Absolutely. They're going to cheat us. They're going to try to take advantage of the positive intent, for sure. But I believe it's still a better way to work and to live, to trust people and enjoy a luxury of relationships that are collaborative, that are built on trust. So I believe it's a risk that we should be willing to take. And that's what the book is about, is convincing people that it's a risk that's worth taking.
Yeah, I love this. As you were talking about it, I was thinking, the other way around, right? Like, because as you said, probably we as leaders, you will be deceived 5%, you're saying research, maybe like 5-10% of the times. But actually, if you flip it around, you will be doing potentially more harm for your teams and organization if you do not trust them first, especially when you're bringing people that are strong, brilliant, who are only waiting for trust and empowerment and for them to do their work. So probably the downside of not doing it is way higher than the risk of having 1/10 from time to time failing you.
That is definitely one of the arguments that I make in the book, which is it's definitely very helpful for our relationships, especially as leaders, with the ripple effect of trust starting to filter throughout the whole organization. So that's one of the main reasons why we should assume positive intent, but it's not the only one. I think the other reason why we should do it is for ourselves, not just for the other person. There's ample evidence that shows that when we work that way and when we live that way, we make ourselves happier. We are less miserable. Imagine all the stewing we involved in, all of the negative thinking, all of the rumination we involve in when we are assuming negative intent. Let's say you and I work together, and in the meeting, I say something that you don't appreciate, or I roll my eyes at your idea, or I, come in late for our meeting. All of these are situations where you could possibly think that I have negative intent. Now, if you go home and you stew about that all evening, you're making yourself miserable. Even if you just do it during the meeting, right? You're missing most of the meeting, most of the communication is happening. You're missing what I'm saying after I did that thing that you believed was wrong or unexplainable. So there is definitely a very strong argument for improving relationships and trust and collaboration. But I believe there is a strong argument as well for doing it for ourselves, to keep our well-being, to keep our happiness. So one of the things that I say is giving others the benefit of the doubt is giving ourselves the benefit of low blood pressure.
Well, this is very true. And as like one of the pieces, obviously, as you're saying, it's also reminding me of all those biases, confirmation bias, and then like you built, even when you gave example of, unfortunately, like wars that we both lived, it's you always find a reason to confirm what you believe the negative intent is. But let me push it a little bit more there. Like sometimes, like, do you believe that at some point some negative intent exists? And then how would you deal with that if it's consistently, like how do you look for it? Because it becomes more than an intent, right? Like if actions or if behaviors are not fitting an organization, when do you take actions? How do you deal with that? What is the impact on the other part of the organization? Because like we've all been in teams where you want to assume positive intent, but it goes back to the same behavior of few people. And I feel like sometimes when you take too much time to address those, it becomes your problem as a leader, right? Like, so I'm trying to I want to trust first, but can you give us like some tools or how to think about this and when to stop going with positive intent?
For sure. And you're definitely thinking about this, the right way, because again, it's not a naive approach. It's not an approach where I'm just going to assume positive intent and let people walk all over me, right? So the idea is start with that provisional position of assuming positive intent and trusting, and then check with yourself, check with the other person, and check with the people who were there when the situation possibly happened. So first we check with ourselves, we see what biases we're bringing to the situation. As you said, we have confirmation biases. We have a bunch of other biases that we can talk about in a minute if you'd like. So we check ourselves first, and then we go and check with that person. And we say, when we had that conversation, it appeared that you had some concerns. It appeared that you were not happy with what I said. Can you please tell me more about that? So we check with the other person. We check with the people who are familiar with the situation, who know that person well as well, who were there at the meeting or who overheard the conversation. So we start with all of that. Now, let's say the behavior happens again shortly after, or it becomes a repetitive behavior. That is where we stop assuming positive intent, because clearly it's not warranted anymore. That's where we start having those difficult conversations of holding the person accountable, telling them, you have proven that you are not willing to work collaboratively, that you are not someone who is, it sounds like you have a hidden agenda or you have some negative intent, and we hold them accountable. If they are peers, we hold them accountable. If they are direct reports, we hold them accountable. So there is always that possibility of going from the original position to a position that is a little bit more accountable, a little bit more tough, where we have those difficult conversations with them.
That's super helpful. If there's today, one thing that you think our leaders, listeners would adopt tomorrow, really to reflect this mindset and basically to make this change in their leadership team and see the impact in their organization, what would that be?
I would offer them 3 very powerful questions to ask themselves. So if we notice someone acting in a way that appears to be wrong to us, or is just questionable or unexplainable, there are 3 questions we can ask. The first question is, what if they have a valid reason for or behind what they're doing? Okay, so that's the first one. What if there is a valid reason? Let's go and check. Second question, what if they're trying their best? Now, that does not absolve accountability, because their best could be not enough, but it is a better starting position. So that's the second question. What if they're trying their best? And then there's a third and more introspective question, which is, you notice someone doing something wrong. You ask yourself, have I myself done something similar to this in the past? Now, that one requires a lot of humility and a lot of courage. I'll give a very simple example. One of the things that bother me the most at work is when people hit reply all. An email goes to a group, there's no need to hit reply all, people hit reply all, and then you have, a thread of messages that is going back and forth. You don't need to be part of that. So that annoys me a lot, but sometimes I stop myself and I say, have I myself done that before, intentionally or not? And the answer is yes, I have done that mistake as well. So then I'm less judgmental. Then I'm more curious. Maybe that person, is busy, is overwhelmed, is distracted, whatever it is. So that last question is such a powerful question to force us to be non-judgmental and to be humble about observing anyone doing a mistake and giving them the benefit of the doubt, as long as it's not a mistake that they keep on repeating over and over, because then we need to have a different conversation.
Well, these are, I won't say easy, but practical, tough questions to ask ourselves. And it's a great way for us to think through it. I'm going to give you now, Amer, a word. You know this part of the podcast where I'll give you a word and you will react to it. The first one you know already. I want to see if it changed. It's leadership.
My thinking about leadership has been evolving over the years, obviously. And the more I think about it now, the more I think about the role of leaders is to project calm and inspire hope, especially during these difficult times. And I believe humility, love, compassion, positive intent, all of these are great tools that leaders have to project calm and inspire hope.
That's beautiful. What about trust?
I say trust is efficient. If we can start with that starting point of trust, and the other person proves worthy of our trust, and then they start trusting us back, that relationship is going to take off so much faster. We're going to collaborate so much faster. The speed of our interactions is going to be so much better, and we're going to be more productive. So I think of trust as a fundamental principle, and I think of it in terms of efficiency and allowing relationships to go on much faster, because you don't need to check each other's intentions anymore. We don't need to worry about, if I have bad intent, if you're trying something bad. We just trust each other fully, and then we can then focus on the work itself rather than the politics and the personalities.
The third one is author.
Author for me is discipline. We were chatting before we started, and we're talking about writing books and all of that, and I get the question asked a lot, which is, what does it take to write a book? And my answer is always discipline. It's showing up. It's finding the time. It's opening your laptop and opening that blank page and writing that number of words that's required for you to be able to finish the book on time. My challenge for this last book as an author was to find the time in between teaching and between coaching and between travel. And I wrote a lot of it in airport terminals and on airplanes. And believe me, that was not the first thing that I wanted to do. I was tired on an airplane ride back home. Nonetheless, I opened that laptop and I wrote 2,000 words, which is what I was trying to do most days. So it's really all about discipline.
Oh, the last one is spread love in organizations.
Spread love in organizations. I still believe that is one of the primary duties of leaders. And leaders who don't see it that way, I think, are not going to be great leaders in this current environment. So I would say it's absolutely necessary. And as we've discussed, it has to be coupled and complemented with accountability.
Any final word of wisdom, Amer, for leaders around the world?
Again, these are very difficult times, negative world we live in, divisive times. It's the leader's duty to be aware of that, to recognize that people are bringing some of that negativity with them to work, and to show up in an intentional way. It all starts with the leaders showing up intentionally in ways where they spread love, they're spreading humility, they're spreading compassion, assuming positive intent, all these great things we've talked about. Because as we both know, it doesn't happen by itself. You got to be intentional about it so you can be consistent and resilient in the long run.
Well, thank you so much, Amer, for being again with me today. And hopefully we will do a third one at your sixth book launch. But I hope you'll take a break and enjoy some of the time too as you're coaching and spreading the word about your book.
Thank you, Naji. It's been a pleasure as always, a lot of fun. You're a great interviewer. So as always, I had a lot of fun with you.
Thanks for listening to the show. For more episodes, make sure to subscribe to spreadloveio.com or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Let's inspire change together and make a positive impact in healthcare, one story at a time.